Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. As we continue to map out the path to the pinnacle of bonsai, we often look for those who aren't just practicing the craft, but are actively reshaping the culture around it. My guest today is Julian Tsai. Since returning from his apprenticeship at Fujikawa Koka-en in Japan, Julian's really taken the Southern California bonsai scene by storm. He's a professional who balances a deep, very philosophical outlook with a highly technical and disciplined approach. So I think this conversation is going to be a lot of fun with him. We're going to dive into what he calls the kind of three facets of mastery and talk about what it looks like to take ownership of a community's growth in bonsai. So Julian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good. So I wanted to kind of dive right into it, I guess, and ask you a little bit about, if you've listened to the podcast at all, we kind of talk about these different pillars of bonsai, but I want to get your take on what would you define as the kind of constituent pillars of bonsai from a curriculum or structure standpoint?
So I think this question is really important, and it's not just unique to bonsai, but how we choose to frame something or the perspective we consider it is naturally will greatly influence how you practice, not necessarily art, any craft or profession. And so I kind of actually dislike for, say, some kind of art related or art type mediums or crafts where, people can say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or this is just how I like it, and things of that nature. And because while there's still merit in that kind of statement, you just completely throw to the side any basis for how you consider, practice, and evaluate the art. And I think anything will have some core values or quote unquote tenets that from an objective basis, we can say these are intrinsic qualities to this practice. If we operate in recognition in light of them, we can extract its utmost potential, right? And so for me, these three, principles or tenet of bonsai lies in, one that's easy to understand is aesthetics, right? Most people starting in bonsai, they see the tree, they feel inspired, or perhaps they have some motivation from something they see from nature. So it's a very intuitive way of coming into the art, right? You want something that looks good. So that's probably the easiest to start off. The second aspect is technique. And so we have perhaps some kind of aesthetic goal. How do we bend a branch? How do we apply wire, degrees of manipulation? We know that there is some type of craft aspect where we are leveraging some technique, ideally with a purpose, and it achieves some kind of result in how the plant looks or grows. And then the last facet, which is, very tricky in some ways, is the horticulture. But I don't frame it just in horticulture in how you grow a plant healthy or understand how a plant grows. I talk about this last facet as growing technique. Really, all these three aspects are interrelated, but I call it growing technique in that because we use a living tree, right? A intrinsic quality of bonsai is that this living tree is subject to change. Even if your conception in terms of your artistry and aesthetic is at its pinnacle, its highest level, you are bound to this degree of influence from the plant that can alter your conception, influence the design. And so the work must coincide with that. And so usually when I talk about growing technique, it's kind of when you understand horticulture really well, you start thinking about, if I lay this branch in this way or cut this branch in this way, how does it affect, say, the overall big picture development of the tree? Can you not just guess or say if you work the tree and then your next result is, let's see, the tree was just going to do whatever and we'll figure it out after. You kind of concede a degree of control in terms of, obtaining your desired outcome. And really, because there is a basis in horticulture, right? These trees operate by these rules of nature for its survival. They look for the path of least resistance and efficiency to procure energy and survive. If a plant could not do this in nature, whenever there is like natural disaster, major stress, these trees would just not make it in the greater scope of time. And so understanding that relation kind of yields this thing I call growing technique. And you can start, I don't know if like predicting is the right word, but you understand if you do this work, it'll produce some kind of result and you remove guesswork from that. And so, say if you were to pursue and achieve bonsai ability at its pinnacle, you will have kind of mastery of these three facets, right? Your aesthetic vision, and it's kind of your sensibility and taste, the technique to leverage that result, and the growing ability to see it through with a greater time scale and kind of utilize the fact that we are using a living tree.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess that was a lot, but I want to kind of capture a few sections of it. One was, like, from my personal view, I also 100% agree with, like, there is a undeniable, like, quality of a tree that, were you able to demonstrate your mastery of these three components, I think is an undeniable fact, or for me, for my taste at least, is like impressive to see. And so this like undoubtedly ties into judging, right? But
Yeah.
to me, like a bonsai tree can be like objectively better than another bonsai tree. It isn't all just like, oh, subjective, like, do you like this one
Right.
better or not? I want to live in a world where this thing that I'm dedicating a lot of time to and trying to improve my technical skills at, like, those technical skills are acknowledged, right? And that's a
Yeah.
part of the judging criteria. So I'm
Mhm.
100%. I mean, yeah, I agree that maybe not everyone agrees with that philosophy, but
Yeah.
for me at least, like that very much aligns with my ethos of like why I'm putting so much time into this, because those things are noticeable, right?
Right.
Somebody else who can do that also notices how
Yeah.
hard that is to do and should hopefully then rate it as a higher, more well crafted or created bonsai, right?
Yeah, and something I should note when I kind of give this framework, this does not like, it's not predisposing itself to a certain avenue or aesthetic of bonsai. These are kind of like a overarching universal principle which can be realized in great diversity. And so say like I'll just talk about like judging very quickly. It's very easy, say we can dismiss like the perspective or critique of others and say like, oh well, they don't appreciate my style or I have a different conception. Those things are valid in itself, and truly people may have different conceptions and there's nothing wrong with that or a reason to disparage it. This is kind of more a fundamental principles rooted behind that. So it's not to say, well, by understanding these three facets, like I declared this kind of bonsai to be the best is not quite the end goal of this discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so difficult though to disconnect the because you're saying essentially like these are the important things that you need to be able to do to create a high quality bonsai. The deduction from that, I guess, is that in your eyes there is to some extent a large influence on the quality of a tree that's based on like, did the creator, did they demonstrate their mastery of these three pillars, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I guess the aesthetic, there's always the challenge of like, is this tree, regardless of the aesthetic choice, like did they reach the pinnacle of that aesthetic, right? And
Yeah.
did they show that they are pushing the bounds of the horticulture as well as aesthetic or technique, right, to accomplish that?
Mhm.
So my brain really likes that
Yeah.
thought process of like, hey, let's have just an objective, the health of the tree is a set of points,
Yeah.
and like, but I realize not everyone kind of functions in that structure, right? But
Mhm.
so, I agree, 100% agree with you that there's these constituent components that kind of cross horticulture and aesthetic and technique, and they're also very interrelated, right? I think
Yeah.
that you're explicitly saying like horticulture and technique are almost like fully meshed together is interesting, and I
Yeah.
think correct. But one thing I wanted to ask you is like, I also kind of think of it like there's a fourth pillar, which is like the time or kind of discipline, like habit
Hmm.
aspect. Because even if you're perfect at bonsai, like you
Yeah.
can make the perfect decision in the moment. There's still the idea that like a tree isn't made in a moment, right? And so you need to not only be perfect in that moment, but be perfect in every moment of the tree's ascent to its pinnacle form or whatever, right? Or whenever you're
Yeah.
going to show it.
Yeah. And that's why especially like trees which are old as bonsai is impressive because just naturally the longer something exists as bonsai, it's even it's very realistic. Even we strive to give the best care and perfection as much as feasible. There's actually a very high probability in the duration of say a lifespan or a few lifespans. There's like natural weather issues. People have like the real aspects of just life. There's like health crises, like day-to-day fires they need to put out, and the tree is very likely in the order of decades to have had periods where stuff happens. And so when you see trees that have successfully transpired and receive work for this huge amount of time, it just bears some weight, right? There is still a tangible aspect to that.
Totally. So, do you think any of these pillars are more or less important than the others, or like do you think one has more weight? I guess if we're saying weight, then we're saying like from a
Yeah.
judging aspect. But
Uh-huh.
what's your personal outlook on the pillars and like their relative importance?
And this part is like, so it gets like more tricky, and this is where the weight of the respective pillars can depend on your perspective on bonsai. And so say if you had a quote unquote purist perspective, say from the philosophy of bonsai, and we could touch more on this if we want, but say as kind of philosophical concepts as described in the practice of bonsai in Japan. It's like wabi-sabi and stuff, right? I'm like don't even know I can explain it super well. I'll give like the condensed basic version of it. So like it's like a two-word component. I'll explain the second one first. It's easier to explain. But sabi literally translates as rust. And so it's kind of not a hard definition, but it's a phrase that alludes to the effects time has on something, right? Rust is, we know, it's oxidizes, right? Weathering and so forth. But like anything of similar nature, and some concession that, okay, the time is, I can't think of the word right now. But anyway, it's guaranteed to transpire. And the effects will be imposed on something. It's something we don't look as a deterrent, but of natural course. And we can appreciate beauty in that. And that's kind of, a big aspect for a lot of people in bonsai. People sometimes they know that explicitly, or you just get like a feeling when you see a very old tree and you're like, there's something more than just the literal tree shape, right? And again, this is relating to intrinsic qualities of using a tree. Sometimes people say like, oh, that's like bonsai in Japan, and for me, I don't really like delineate say bonsai in Japan or outside Japan, because what they have provided us in Japan is basically a really well vetted train of thought that really relates to, right, the using a living tree. So it's not like culturally unique to Japan per se, but they have very, because there's like a long history and they practice
It's
a long
mature.
time,
Yeah.
right? They have existing definitions to explain conceptions, which can be like universally applied, right? It's a more broadly applicable philosophy of like the human experience and how you regard time. I guess I talked about the second component of wabi sabi first, but the first component is wabi, and this is like I've like much harder for me to explain, but there's like a few aspects about it. One, it's kind of saying there is beauty and imperfection, but that's also wrong. Like, I kind of don't like it when people say that statement. What it's saying is that if in any natural process, actually, I read something recently, they even have like the wabi as described in like engineering, but it's like, say in like any production or process, there will be some concession, a natural degree of variation or tolerance that is just a byproduct of a process or system. And you concede that as the natural, inherent, let's say, the flaw and variation of that system or rule of nature. And so there's basically some degree of imperfection, but it's not like you deliberately do that, right? So, say from the ceramics perspective, people make pots and freeform pots, and like, oh, this like hand molded pots is all wobbly and stuff is wabi-sabi. And that's like sometimes it's just a poorly made pot, right? It's like so it's more pure than that, where it's you seek perfection and you concede the degree of natural flaw and you find what are only the essential things for conveying the essence of what you're doing, and then the other stuff doesn't matter, and natural variation of that comes to the surface. I think that's very hard to obtain in bonsai. I know this is like getting a little off, but it'll tie back in. I guess have to give context.
No,
And
I love these types of conversations, so I'm learning a lot. So go ahead.
yeah, and so it's, I think they describe wabi as like austere beauty. It's like very simple, maybe harsh and rugged, which is something like a tree from nature. It will have some kind of like, yeah, it's like severity to it, and imperfection, but not by your own deliberation, but of natural course and relating to using a living tree. And so say if you were a quote unquote bonsai purist, and then knowingly or not these values are, say, super important to you as bonsai, then in those three tenets of bonsai you will naturally favor, say, more like growing technique and horticulture, and then still like technique to make the tree, because these things are essential for the long-term cultivation and sustainability and realization of a bonsai. And of course, we alluded to, this time aspect, that time quality and this pursuit of perfection over time will yield the subtle essence of wabi-sabi. So if you're a purist, you're like, oh, this is the most important, and I want my tree to have this age to it, and this like it's like deeper than just aesthetic in a sense. And then you say, okay, maybe there's some aesthetic variation and maybe it comes into like your taste or whatnot, and you could favor it less. But I wanted to give a caveat because kind of I feel all three are like equally important, and the part that makes, say, like a true quote unquote master, why getting this like triple balance is so hard. Let me just give like an example. So say like aesthetically, maybe you have strong motivations, which is I'm inspired by some harsh shapes in nature, or I want my tree to inherently have a stronger degree of motion, or there's a theme it's suggesting. And then these are more kind of like, it's like not unique to bonsai, like how you can shift the visual weight, the balance, and the lines. It could be applied to anything like architecture, other forms of art. One thing that makes it really tricky in bonsai, let's say you have a tree, you wanted to do like some very interesting kind of delicate soft lines and stretch the elongation a bit. So maybe you shift the weight of the apex, some of the branch lines get a bit longer, and you tastefully use a lot of smaller, younger branches, which gives like some elegance or grace. To say, I was trying to just think of an example, but I guess it's just broadly speaking, right? You have more creative or directional design.
Totally.
Some of the stuff like people in the U.S. are doing, or say like Ryan Neal, some of those aesthetics are like really, really good. Actually, it's very tasteful. It's not that like easy to do either, right? People have a good sensibility in what they're wanting to convey. But then the part that gets real tricky when you want to say reincorporate that into the horticulture and technique. One example I've been giving when I work with my clients or I teach people, say we're developing junipers, and this also relates to managing foliage, whether to graft or not graft. When I'm cultivating a branch, I look for this break even point where not only the branch looks good, but in my cultivation period, I can grow this branch healthy enough and naturally let it produce enough wood and grow thick enough that its lignification, the development of woody structure, becomes strong enough to bear the weight of the foliage for my design. And you have to like modify this based off different foliage types. Some foliage types is heavier. The branch needs to be stronger to support it. Some tree species does not produce wood very easily, right? It's naturally more lacy or more floppy. And so when you have a design that you have a high degree of complexity or asymmetry or utilization of long skinny branches, you must also plan in this kind of intermediate period of development. While my aesthetic conception is good, can I complete successive, I call balance cycles or foliage cultivation cycles that will secure footholds in my design? It's not just like a concept, it's a real physical thing. Like the wood of the tree, and it starts retaining aspects of my conception, then you have the best of all three. You're a very like tasteful aesthetic conception, and then it coincides with your cultivation technique and horticulture. And so tends to be on average, and this is can be intentional or not, that people that say like or prioritize like this aesthetic component more, sometimes they struggle to some level on the other aspects. Or maybe both the aesthetic and technique is really good and then the cultivation is not as good and vice versa. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to like critique anybody. Say from my own learning experience, and I've kind of find people are like predisposed to be really good at one of these categories. And then you need to know your shortcomings to improve the quality in the other facets. And then long term, you become a more balanced and capable bonsai practitioner. So for me, like I think especially now I'm like very good at like the cultivation part. So I know like which branch is going to make it, which one's going to die, which one could die in a few years because the growth trajectory and light exposure is not sustainable where I can achieve that break even point. So it's never going to get enough wood in its development pathway to lock it into the design. That's like, you could develop that just from very conscious efforts while you're working on the tree and very careful observation. So it becomes not like the tree just whatever it does. I like know exactly how it's going to grow, and that makes it easier to predict or obtain an outcome. And then something that when I was in Japan that my senpai Naoki Maoka he had told me, which was like good advice I received. He says like it's important to just always improve your conception of bonsai, because as long as you're practicing, and I give a caveat here, like practicing with purpose and intention, your technique will always improve over time. So long as you're working on trees, you can always, like, everybody can always improve their technique. But that's has to be like purposeful, like with intent. You could just kind of not really bear it much weight and also not improve technique after working on hundreds and thousands of trees. But if you act with intention, I think everybody can improve their technique. But then stuff, say like your sensibility, aesthetic conception, I think that's is hard to develop. Say, speaking for like my personal experience, like I like know, especially when I was younger, I'm like not a proficient artist or have good, I've looked at like my really early bonsai work, like when I was in a hobbyist, and it's just like, to me it's good, but I know objectively it's like very poor balance, lines is not good, And that was like my weak aspect, right? I had to improve on. I remember like when I was in college and I was getting into like photography, and I was so excited, like had like my first like paying internship, and I was like, I bought a camera and some lenses, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna learn photography. And I just go like, it was just fun, just go anywhere and take photos of stuff. And then I had like another friend who did it more seriously, and I was just like, I thought they were all great, right? I was excited to show him the photos. And like I know he was just, I understand now he's just being nice to me, because compositionally they were like really bad. I would just take photos of anything I thought just looked cool, and it was fun for me. And so on my effort of improving skill, and then now being as a professional, I have to very consciously think about, what are ways I could improve the balance, or the sensibility of a design, what I want to convey. And you're conscientious about that, and slowly but surely it gets better and you improve. And so it tends to be that, I would say, of like high level professionals, the people that achieve the absolute pinnacle of balance and consciously engaging with all three is like very low. Like for me, people that do that, they're like goats in bonsai. And
Totally.
I think this is worth to talk about, because some people, they are consciously aware of it, and then say you could know that and just choose not to like do it, because it's like very tedious, very time consuming. If you're a professional and you have a model of business where your income is tied into selling trees or producing trees, to make trees that embody the peak of these three aspects, there is no like fast way to make it, right? You can say that because I have a great aesthetic sensibility and I want to push this quality of my ability and talent more, and perhaps for rooted in a business model, it makes more sense. You willingly concede that maybe I will not be able to complete a proper cultivation period, because maybe that results in you making less money. There's a harder or practical aspect as well. Um, and and so truly, for the best trees, you need all three of these facets, and it's very hard to do, because it requires you to know everything fairly well and working in tangent with all of these at all times as
Yep.
you're styling, designing your tree. The technique, let's say, is the baseline. You constantly improve your technique. Let's say your technique becomes very good, and then technique is not a given, but let's just say for this example, you have top technique already. So you're only thinking of your aesthetic mastery and your growing ability, growing technique. Then it's like, while you're styling this tree, you think like, okay, I have this great line here. It's going to shift the weight and give this look I want. In placing this line here, am I able to sustain it for this amount of time? Or for the foliage type I am using, what quality of growth is necessary to produce the wood lignification that can lock in this part of the design? My opinion is, especially like, say like you're professional, it's like you need to engage with that, because that is like for the purpose of producing trees at the highest level. And so for me, it's important. And then if you opt not to engage with that, then you also concede that the tree may not like come to its fullest potential or fruition. Yeah, so it's real tricky, and this is something that I'm constantly, every year I'm trying to like optimize and make better and better and better, because for my own personal ambition, it's like, and this is the fun part in bonsai, is like the skill ceiling is so high, and I feel that as long as I work with intention and deliberation, there is no reason that even on professional level, your skill can't appreciably increase every year. So I feel that's fun and there's great potential.
Yeah, that's been a consistent thing on the podcast is people are always grabbed by the depth of bonsai and the ability to always have something to improve in, right?
Hmm.
I I know this is going back a ways, but
Yeah.
your point on wabi-sabi was interesting. I didn't know any of that. Like to me, it was like, oh, the pursuit, finding beauty in imperfections, right? But hearing about wabi and understanding about the idea of like imperfections introduced by the kind of tolerances inherent to processes is interesting. I also, so kind of summarizing some of your aesthetic points, what I would say is like the meat of it is there are horticultural and technique aesthetics have to take in mind that there are like horticultural and technical limitations to design. So we don't have a total free form art medium here because the tree is living and because you want to showcase like longevity and increasing like depth to the design over time. There are
Yeah.
some aesthetic limitations, right?
Yeah. But you
Okay.
can push it, I would say, still pretty far. And then a person that is able to push like that perfect tension and boundaries and still have that cultivation, then that's like a
Yeah.
master, like for me.
Yes.
Like
That makes sense. That makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And definitely few and far between in the world.
Yeah.
Definitely something to shoot for and strive for.
Hmm.
So something that did you listen to Jeremiah's podcast with Seth Nelson yet?
Was there like another recent one?
I think there was his most recent one. I don't know when it came out. It might have been a little bit ago. It was a
I
few
no,
hour
yeah, yeah. I
conversation
think
though.
I did listen
Okay.
to it. Yeah.
Well, so in that talk, and I might be butchering this point, so apologies if
Hmm.
I am to Seth and Jeremiah, but Seth had this very interesting statement. I think two interesting statements. One was like he didn't quite understand the idea of like American bonsai, like
Yeah.
bonsai being different in the US than in Japan
Hmm.
due to cultural differences or something like that, or like this idea that bonsai can't exist separate from the kind of institution in Japan or the like
Yeah.
building of the art over the long time period. And then the second one was like that bonsai as an art form is inherently limited, is my hopefully not too butchering of it, but like, hey, you're not able to express emotion, for example, through bonsai in the same way as in like a painting or something like that, right?
Hmm.
And so yeah, I was very curious on your thoughts on those points because I thought they
Yeah.
were like well articulated points and gave me a lot to
Hmm.
think about. So I was curious on your thoughts on those, and sorry if I butchered them,
Oh no,
but
no, it's fine. I mean, a part of that, say we say like generating emotional response, that part is a little subject to like person to person variation, right? That can depend on, well, what is that particular person influenced by, and to what degree of impact do they need to feel to convey that emotion. That part, it's hard to say. And so I can't say whether or not bonsai is capable or not capable of doing that. I think in both situations can simultaneously hold true. But I think the more underlying point is that bonsai is not a true free for all or do whatever. Because, say, if we go back to these three quote unquote facets or tenets of bonsai, that's less of a cultural classification, but this is just intrinsic of utilizing a tree long term. And I think that's something important to re-emphasize, and because it kind of maybe is like not good to say, but a lot of times working with people giving programs, and I hear a lot of different opinions or people have strong views on bonsai, a common critique is like, well, that's how they do it in Japan. I have my way or I have a better way. And that's kind of like a conclusion made from a incomplete scope of knowledge, because truly these facets, although it is well defined in Japan because they have a pre-existing long culture behind that, it's really like broadly applicable if you like using a tree as a medium for this conception of art. And in that sense, that's like not as defined by Japan, but not unique to Japan, is kind of the way I frame it. And so I do think it's a little like tricky when people say like, oh, well, like this is American bonsai or this and that. And I think you're quote unquote American aspects can be like using the species, right? That's available to you that reflect your local diversity and still can be very aesthetically motivated by, oh, I see trees growing in this way, conveying this weight or this directionality. That is 100% all valid. But that in itself, for me, doesn't necessarily qualify it as a unique entity, as separate from bonsai in Japan. And so really for me, bonsai is just bonsai. There's like not a country classification. And so that's I feel a lot of stuff in bonsai it's just could be like semantics or perspective, but people need to think a little more carefully or precisely because we kind of like gloss over boundaries or like kind of not regard something in full entirety. So I would say
I guess
there's yeah.
I guess so I think your point of, hey, bonsai is not necessarily something unique culturally to Japan. It's more they have gone the furthest in developing this system of interacting with plants to form a, cultivated result in a pot, right? Is that essentially what you're saying? Like it's not unique to
Yeah,
Japan
I mean,
culturally,
of
but
course, it's
yeah.
like the expression from China, then like
Sure.
modified and developed in Japan. Of course, it's like we could say historically that's where people gained exposure to it. But once people had exposure to it, to embody those tenets or values does not require you to subscribe strongly to cultural values in Japan or to be like, oh, like I need to even live in
I don't
Japan
know
or
if
so
I'd
forth.
fully. I don't know if I mean, from an
Huh.
aesthetic perspective, maybe it
Yeah.
does, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you think that, you know, making the decision to have a more symmetrical or
Uh-huh.
like full design, or like the scale of trees in Japan is sometimes different than the scale of trees in other localities, and like also like using a unique element of the tree
Yeah.
to that, like building a design around a unique element of a tree,
Yeah.
whereas maybe in
Yeah.
Japan it's more common to like there's cultural norms that might lead to everything wanting to blend in more, and so you'd
Mm-hmm.
graft over that and like make a tree differently. So I think there are like maybe not well, and I also think there's a difference in the U.S. For example, with we have different species, right? And so we
Yeah.
might need
Yeah.
some set of different techniques, and like there might be different levels of just like a Korean hornbeam ramification versus a Kiyohime maple. You expect a
Mm-hmm.
different degree of ramification, and that might lead to different degrees of design, right? Since we have different plant material, we might end up with
Yeah,
different
and that
different
part I'm
outcomes.
not like arguing against that. That's like wholly legitimate. I was kind of more trying to say like that as a distinguishing aspect does not separate it as a different entity from bonsai in Japan. Because you're right, people can have like a preconceived bias where their conception of like harmony or balance or maybe they are the purist that's like as long as my bonsai has this full kind of quote unquote spirituality of wabi-sabi it's like it doesn't really matter how it looks, so they just go with like very simple elegant designs, not overthink like too much stuff. And then you can have different views of that could be like a criticism where like, oh, it looks too similar. um and so that part is true, there are differences there, but for me, these differences are more like on the surface, and that expression, of course, can vary with your like taste. And of course, you're bound to the trees you're using, right? They will grow differently in different climates and different species. That will have some influencing factor, but then the underlying core values behind those expressions is still the same. And
Hmm.
I felt that if you start to deviate too far from those core principles, it's not like separating yourself from bonsai in Japan or not. You are separating yourself from the aspects of using a tree. And I do think
Hmm.
that is not necessarily a limitation. It just depends like how your perspective on that. It's like our advantage, the unique aspect of bonsai. We use the tree to our favor and to create an expression that is unique than other art mediums. We shouldn't look at it as, oh, this is limiting. It's, of course, any medium or art you pursue, there will be advantages and disadvantages it has in its ability to convey something, and you just try to extract the greatest potential out of it. And so I think, like, going back to what Seth was saying, it can be quote unquote limiting, but using a tree, it's like it shouldn't be considered like demerit, right? It's just not directly comparable. Our means of expression or goals of expression may not always coincide and be the same as a sculpture or painting or so forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think so? I mean, do you think penjing is something different than bonsai?
Yeah, so penjing is something I've been like more interested in the last few years and kind of like thinking about it more. For me, the core tenets is the same. But
Mm,
say we talked about the expression of cultural differences or biases. Like, so I'm actually like very lucky, like here in LA at the Huntington Gardens, the Penjing curator, people just call him Mr. Che here. And he's like very good, like maybe the best in the US in this avenue of his practice. And I remember the first time I like met him, and he's like kind of this very like stern, grumpy, like Cantonese man. And I was working with another professional a while ago, John Wong, and then I think he was helping Che do his taxes or something, and he came over, and he was asking like, oh, like who's this, like my like Mandarin ability is like not that strong. I like kind of understand, but maybe not at a high level. Communication's a little weak. So anyways, John was translating, and he's asking like, who is this guy? And then John was just like, oh, like he's this guy, he just like quit his job and he wants to do bonsai. And then the Penjing curator was like, he's like, oh man, in Asia, like they would never do it. This guy has no survival instinct, and like how could he just like so they're just like, my first impression is this
roasting
guy
you,
just
yeah.
roasting me for like, it was like for like over an hour. And I'm like, dude, like I just met you. Like you don't even know me. And but anyways, I got over that, and I was very lucky to expose to a lot of his work. And so kind of going back to the main subject, like on his trees, say within the Penjing model, it's like they will make a conscious choice for the purpose of the aesthetic, right? They want trees maybe with greater individuality, or it conveys more aesthetic weight or like movement or harshness to it. And so the principles is the same, but when they use the technique to express the aesthetic, they will put a greater degree of time, say compared to a quote unquote conventional bonsai from Japan, into cultivating the main branches. And so I had like a blog post I wrote a while ago about like deciduous branch principles. And kind of the example I gave is that we know when we cut a tree, assuming it is appropriately timed and the tree is healthy, there is a ability to increase ramification, a simple idea of 1 to 2 to 4, 8, and so forth. You don't have to let the tree ramify every time you cut it, right? You can make a conscious decision in the development pathway that the tree still receives the same number of iterative techniques, but your priority is to convey some complexity or strength in the main branch more for some aesthetic goal. And in that interval of applied work, instead of increasing the ramification, you do some degree of maybe cut derived movement, right? People kind of know, quote unquote, clip and grow. That's like oversimplified. There's like more complexity in how you can change the weight and movement of the branch via iterative cutting techniques. But it's kind of like you can make a distinction like, okay, for these slices, as I'm building out the tree in, the density is not going to increase, but the branch is going to have some kind of weight, a degree of movement you can choose to your discretion. Maybe you want it harsher movement or softer movement. And so when you have the complete tree, maybe that tree has less ramification than the quote unquote classic bonsai because you made a choice that I will not increase the density for every iterative cut cycle. But in reality, the tree still shows the same amount of, I call like changes. It's like a time record in the progression of building the branch. And so it bears the same quality of age and still prescribes to the same principle, but the practitioner has made the conscious choice on what that expression should be. So in that sense, yeah, penjing is a good example in that there can be a cultural bias or predisposition on what you find is beautiful or what commands presence and weight, and it gives you a different aesthetic result. But even with that greatly differing end aesthetic result, to obtain that, the core value set of using the tree is still the same. So having a strong aesthetic goal is not an excuse to abandon other facets of bonsai,
Mm,
because when you do that, you are less so making a different version of bonsai, but abandoning bonsai altogether, where you're saying, like, for the purpose of what I want to convey, like these facets intrinsic to bonsai does not work to my advantage. And so I will choose not to engage with them, but in turn I'm producing something new. Bonsai isn't that easy like that, where the tree will just be like, screw you, I'm going to kill half of them with my branches, and I mean, it's just that can be, depending on how you look at it, a limitation. And but of
mm.
course, we love using trees for bonsai, right? So I want to use the tree to as much as it can provide me to its full potential, and so that's kind of a little tricky, but
Yeah.
but
So
you can,
I'm
yeah.
still thinking through this a little bit, but to me, you kind of described, maybe it's Chinese bonsai, right? And
Mhm.
there's like, you're saying, hey, there's this thing that ties the Chinese bonsai to to Japanese bonsai, in that like we're finding value in the like demonstration of age in the cultivation of the tree.
Yeah.
Even if like, hey, the Chinese bonsai maybe ends up with, you know, a little bit, uh, it's less to scale, or like it's a wider tree because we started the ramification farther out on the branch to add more movement in the primary, for example, or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that you're saying that the thing that makes it bonsai still is that there's still like a record of the practitioner's interaction with the tree
Yeah. So they
in
still had to
the
be.
aesthetic end goal.
Yeah, so like in achieving, irrespective of your aesthetic end goal, that practitioner still had to apply the horticulture. Think about, is a tree healthy? How does it respond when I cut it, wire it, manipulate a branch? When should I apply these things to achieve a reaction, a result from the tree? In reality, most of the work we apply on trees is a form of stress. And so the result is contingent upon the tree responding favorably. So the principles of your horticulture and then like your branch manipulation techniques, it's it's all the same still. But as the
Mm,
individual practitioner, whether say you are in penjing or bonsai or trying to come up with your own conception, that is like totally legitimate, but you can't abandon the kind of those core values, because that has less to do with, say, cultural influence, but the more to do with the plant. um so I guess that's kind of more what I wanted to say. Like in Japan, they very well conceptualized like engaging with the plant and long-term outcomes that will be realized by doing that, right? And basically we can use that to our advantage. We don't have to go through our own deep, both horticultural and philosophical journey to see what comes to fruition. You can take the knowledge which has been available or been shared and propagated by other professionals or apprentices. And then you can make the choice as the individual practitioner or professional, is that I really like my trees to look in this way. I like my trees to convey, say, the American aspect. You can have trees within like climate or native species that, yeah, they will probably have different look from trees in Japan, because our it is temperate climate, but seasonality can vary, humidity, rain exposure, wind. And so the tree maybe in nature, if say that's your motivator to reciprocate something from nature, it could look drastically different. But to obtain that expression at a high level, you still need integration of those core values. And although it's been defined by Japan, it shouldn't be a thing where like, I don't want, because I don't want to be tied into like Japanese bonsai, or because the labeling of something within like another culture is maybe something I don't want to subscribe to. I mean, you can ignore all that stuff. Just like take the essence of kind of the knowledge which has already been disseminated, and you have like your free will as a practitioner.
Totally. Yeah, I guess to me, it seems like it doesn't seem so far fetched though that there could be something like American bonsai where that. I mean, the devil's in like how do you define that, right? But
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious, and like I don't. This isn't something I think about a ton, so I'm
Uh-huh.
probably not the right one to vouch for it. But I
Yeah.
guess like imagine Americans decided that the most loop-de-loops that you put into a tree in the branches,
Yeah.
like the most circles that you add, like that's the pinnacle of the relationship with the tree and conveys the
Yeah.
most strong emotion or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then you might use bonsai techniques and horticulture and everything that you've learned from the Japanese bonsai system to accomplish that. But like, does that count
Exactly.
as American bonsai? I don't know, right? So
Yeah, and that's right, and that part is like more tricky, where it just depends, right, how you want to define what is a unique enough identifier.
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's more like there are still some aspects we can't totally betray, or it's, and then it's just working against us. Like then we shouldn't be using a tree. We can paint something.
When you say, yeah, when you say don't betray, like the first thing that comes to my mind is like, you don't want to throw out Japanese techniques that have been honed over hundreds of years or whatever because you want to do something different. And then you have to rediscover all the mistakes that they did along their path of cultivating trees in pots, right?
Right,
Is
because
that
a
kind of
lot
what
of
you're
it
saying?
is,
Like,
yeah, it's like, say, like well vetted technique. It just really, it's just like, say, like how bonsai knowledge is developed. It's like many years of like your anecdotal experience of vetting some tree pathway, and you find out over X amount of time what worked or didn't work. You know, one example I gave, if people had to learn how to optimize building deciduous trees from scratch, the first iteration, which I see like new hobbyists do, is that they know relative to their trunk and their aesthetic conception, there's some like ideal size of the canopy. I mean, like too big, you lose size scale. Too small, there's no branches to convey everything. So starting out, they're like, oh, it feels nice when the tree's about this big. And it could be like an intuitive thing. Like, okay, grow the branches this long and cut and maintain it. And they're like, okay, and you can do that very quickly, right? Just grow long branches and cut it a shape. And so in the first few years, the practitioner is like very excited. It's like, oh, I have this like semblance of a tree shape, cut and maintain it, cut and maintain it. But now we have something where it's like, well, the tree is not following our avenue of aesthetic conception. It's looking, how can I survive? How can I procure energy efficiently? The path of least resistance. So the long-term bias, because you've built your silhouette size too fast, it means to maintain it because you're already at the branch radius, you're cutting at the same spot over and over and over. Of course, you might get some back buds here and there and you phase out branches, but what happens, but this is like the 5-10 year projection, is that all your branch tips start getting too coarse, because I call this phenomenon like localized knuckling, where the branches don't have to grow exactly at the same spot, but if the net average of many future iterations of growth happen within close proximity, those regions, I guarantee they'll become like super thick. But you don't see
yeah.
that until like 5 or 10 years later, and then the practitioner sees that, and they're one day in their winter silhouettes, oh, my tree's feeling a little chunky, it's kind of heavy on the tips, like oh, well, maybe we should cut it, and they cut it back, and then, well, what you've done in that process is that you've just wasted like 5, 10 years of time to saying something, and you're like, oh, this pathway reached a dead end. If I'm to maintain the quality of my aesthetic, the tree then has to become bigger, right? Because now the branch tips is too chunky. And so in the next iteration, they're like, okay, well, maybe I know my tree is going to be cultivated to this size range. My technique must precede it. And they even though it's not at that aesthetic optimum, like say the first shot, they know it will converge and hit that size as it naturally develops, so the silhouette size can coincide with a good branch quality that's not like super thick on the tips. And then you can repeat many iterations of that, and they discover, oh, like, and so of course,
Yeah,
because
yeah. You
bonsai's
don't want
been
to
in
have to.
Japan, like
Yeah,
for
in
a
your
long
lifetime,
time.
you wouldn't be able to rediscover
Yeah,
that, right?
it's
So it
like
makes sense
super
to.
well vetted, and these things, you can like, they're very logical also. It's like not like just some, whimsical technique, or the master said this, I'm gonna do this. You can like reason and engage with the technique and see maybe not the 10-year projection, but within a year slice how things respond, and then extrapolate, oh, this is likely to happen based off this growing trajectory in my observable window. So it's kind of like the cultivation, like horticultural and techniques, that's to be used to your advantage. And if you throw that out the window because you have a deliberate bias, like, well, I just want to pursue or obtain a aesthetic like results faster, and it's like, and this is like no like knock on anybody, because maybe that person's aesthetic conception is like really good and their technique to produce it is extremely good, but then, like, well, what happens in that like 2-year projection, 5-year projection, 10-year projection? You will regress from the peak quality you produced at year one. And so that's where, and this is where you can have like a personal, say a practitioner could say knowingly of that, they still would want to bias the aesthetic result more, because in the way they enjoy bonsai and the aesthetic they want to convey, that's what they like to do. And maybe they don't value this cultivated age aspect as much, and you're willing to concede, okay, my tree may not embody this in this amount of time, but it already fulfills what I want. And so, like, maybe my role as a professional, or say anything we're disseminating bonsai knowledge, we're I'm not like telling people what they should do or shouldn't do, but you just lay out, well, this is the groundwork and the avenues of possibility. And if you choose something knowingly what the trade-offs can be, well, it's like a good faith decision. But
Yeah,
if
that makes
you
sense.
make that choice while also thinking like, I'm gonna have my super cool aesthetic and this like super rich like long-term expression, and you tell other people that as well, then that's kind of like a bad faith decision where it's like maybe not quite the whole picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, whenever I go to professionals, I'm looking to not have to learn that whole process of making trees from scratch and like my own experience. Like I'm hoping to shortcut some of those years of
Right, yeah.
experimentation,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, the one thing that comes up to me as you were explaining that is like you could make a, like in Yamadori, for example,
Mhm.
versus a tree grown from seed, like
Yeah.
you might make some concessions saying, hey, this Korean hornbeam isn't going to have perfect roots, and like this branch is a
Yeah.
little bit out of place, but instead of cutting it off or restarting it, I want to preserve that age, and I just
Yeah, and that and
accept
that
this
is
aesthetic trade-off.
could
But yeah.
could be totally like legitimate. It's not like hard rules all the time. You can have your own personal taste. And in the reality, most things in bonsai, is like highly contextual. So even like, in Japan, there's a lot of trees with a lot of flaws and issues also.
Yeah.
It's not like every tree is like the absolute best level. There's like some natural variation also, right? And there could be just some practical aspect, like a time or monetary motivation. Maybe not every tree is going to be worked to the utmost, like super high degree. So there's some issues here and there. And then, like you said, there could be a deciduous tree or like, oh, the branches are a little funky, or in maybe this year range of its development, it didn't get developed well, or maybe the owner was sick or the tree got sick. But then after the tree has been like grown for like a certain amount of time, then you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to change the tree
Yeah,
to put it
yeah.
on the ideal path to cast its last few decades of developed history? So I
Yeah.
can't remember who told me this. Either it was also my senpai or my Oyakata Fujikawa-san, but I remember somebody telling me that basically in Japan that when something is old enough, you forgive it. It's kind of like alluding to people.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like,
yeah.
you're not going to just go to like say some like super old guy like retirement. He's had their life experience. They've made it through the world in a certain way and developed their decisions, habits that embody who they are. At that age, sometimes it's like you can't really like change people at that point. And for better or worse, that's like who they are. And then sometimes you just give a little grace, like, okay, like for what it is. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah, and
mean,
hopefully that's reflected in the judging of the tree as well, right? Or like
yeah.
that journey is understood. So, okay, so this brings up an interesting point for me though. Like you're saying, hey, rely on the established, process developed in Japan for bonsai, but how do you balance like experimentation in horticulture and technique against these established pathways? Like I'm sure that what's the line between, oh, I'm using a slightly different soil component in Japan, but still using aggregate mixes versus like, oh, I'm going to go and use all organics or something like that. Like, you're probably using different soil, for example, than you
Yeah.
than you used in
Yeah.
Japan, right? So I'm curious, like, how do you balance that
I
experimentation
mean, all of
versus,
that is
yeah,
valid because when I say kind of like the techniques or principles as defined in Japan, it's not like a hard rule set. You need to use soil made up of these ratios, or only cut the branch in this way, or use this wire. It's more of like why the motive of why they are doing that. Like I use soil with more akadama to hold more water, or in Japan, they have a component called a kiryu, which is like the coarse river sand. It's like decomposed granites, like DG, and you can add it and stuff to make things drier. The takeaway is not like I should use these components to produce this result. It's like they use these components to leverage moisture or dryness, whatever, in my local climate and environment. Like using those principles, you can like modify it, right? Like maybe I have less humidity, or my tree doesn't transpire as quickly, it's not moving a lot of water. And so the end expression of the technique does end up different, right? And that's like something you kind of like constantly engage and experiment with, because if I mean it's especially like say it's professional, you'll see a lot of trees in a wide cross section of climates and care regimes. If I went to every collection I work with and I'm like, okay, we're gonna only use these exact ratios, all the trees is gonna get cut this time of year. Some clients have worked great, some other people I'll mess up their trees, or like it doesn't grow as healthy. So it has to be adaptable. So for sure you will experiment and you'll modify things, because there is not a one-to-one translation. And so I didn't wasn't trying to say like, oh, you have to pre-subscribe to a way that's doing things, it's like the Japanese way. They just gave us a principle, and it's for you to use that relative to the tree you have, the growing condition you have, the practical reality of your care to obtain a certain result. And so
mm,
like an example of this, and then maybe I'll get like some flack for this, but going back to like the Chinese curator, um, he made like a lot of actually very high quality deciduous trees that's both like great complexity and quality branch development, and also still obtain very high level ramification. So it's just trees which are old and have been built very intentionally over a long period of time. And then people are like, for me it's like maybe some will like the aesthetic, some won't. Like some stuff like that, I don't have a bias where I think one aesthetic is best. If I see, regardless of the expression, it's been made with consideration and kind of embodying these values, in many different aesthetic forms, they look like beautiful, and they can look great. And so a lot of these trees this guy grew, and what they were planted in was like 100% nursery soil. He would like poo poo people. Oh, you're spending all this money like akadama, like whatever. Like me, like I just buy my soil from Costco or whatever, and just whatever bulk. And but the trees were like beautiful. But the in that situation, that's not just the soil thing. It's like, okay, you're using a soil that's higher organics, higher water retention. How strong are you growing the trees? How are you modifying your watering technique so you don't overwater and underwater? What are the trade-offs of using a soil that's more dense and more wet in terms of root growth and the tree growth? If you are aware of all those things, you can modify your technique, how you water your trees to accommodate that. And so, it's bonsai is like more in the cultivation is more adaptable and flexible than people think, but it requires you as the practitioner to have greater like awareness that you're not looking for blanket solutions when it's your responsibility for cultivating your tree to do your like due diligence, figure out how things grow best in your care, your yard, and you can optimize that. So like you should experiment, because the real world situation will not adhere very consistently all the time.
Yeah. You heard it here, folks. Julian says grow in your trees in potting soil and they'll be beautiful. So that makes sense. I'm wondering, like, how do you balance though that experimentation with, hey, I got to make nice trees and like I can't reinvent the wheel for everything. Is it just basically like, hey, I'm adopting this set of things and then I experiment over time to find what works? Or are you trying to like push the boundaries in terms of like discovering new things actively even when something's not wrong? How
Yeah.
do you balance that in your own practice?
I mean, I'm always trying to watch my trees and client trees very closely, and just to think, can something be done better? How can I make the tree grow healthier? One example I'll give is like growing Atlas cedars in Southern California. If you look at, it's still common enough of a street tree all throughout here. And so they grow down here. And if you look in old California Bonsai Society or GSBF exhibit magazines, there are like a lot of Atlas cedars that the old timers had in Southern California. And like now you see a lot less. And kind of my conclusion is, well, those they all died. But I mean, the reason like they all died is like cedars, if you observe these trees, these for a conifer transpire a lot of water compared to say some pines, junipers. When they grow fast, the soil dries quickly. And so say if we think of LA in the 80s compared to now, in terms of just climate variability, there's just a greater kind of incident rate of these kind of big temperature variation periods. And if people were just doing the status quo care, like, okay, it's full sun, watered here and there, the first time like a change happens, the tree dies, right? It doesn't make it. And so you have to say like, okay, well, in watching the weather and climate, it's like, it's a conifer, but maybe I'm going to put my conifer in like almost all akadama. Does that make sense? Like maybe, or like highly moisture retentive mix. Another thing is like repotting. People are like, as a general convention, you repot in the springtime, you wait for the buds to swell and move a lot, because the temperature or season transitions are harsh where I live, and I observe a transpiration burden where once it starts growing, the tree's moving so much water. When you do a major repot and cut a lot of roots, sometimes the tree is losing more
That
water
makes
than it
sense.
replaces. So people
Yeah,
say
yeah.
like, oh, cedars are hard to repot. My tree just dropped all of its foliage. A third of the branches died. Then it's like, well, it probably lost too much water, right? And then you can ask, well, what if I repot early, like, or before bud movement? Is there a detriment on the tree? How does it tolerate it? And then the practical reality is yes, right? That's what I do. I purposefully repot them very early before bud movement. A healthy tree, it has enough like localized energy in the trunk and the thicker roots. It can bridge that transition, and you buffer the period so the tree doesn't experience this great transpiration shock. It takes big repots, no problem. And so it's kind of like I have to still adapt and experiment because there's so many variables. It's constantly change all the time. But I would say like my current experimentation right now is not so much like growing principles in horticulture, because for me, in a sense, like it's kind of more black and white. I mean, in terms of like, well, either the tree is healthy or not. So it's the best optimal result, whatever you do, is just to produce the best growing tree. And so that's like I want that like all the time. But say the experimentation will be more like aesthetically, right? Well, what can I do to improve precision? Can convey more sensibility in the design, or if I choose to utilize a certain type of branch, right, in my building of a tree, or I want the tree in the future to incorporate these types of branches, then what do I need to do in like my cultivation and technique to make that a reality?
Yeah.
And so when I came back from Japan, it's like there's tons of different juniper foliage types: California, Utah, I mean, all the Chinensis, Shinpaku Itogawa, and then Rocky Mountains. And then I just kind of learned it's like the principal technique is the same for all of them, but they all have different, I call, growing periods that I have to complete in cycle to produce the turgid woody branch that will lock in the aspect of my design. So my end goal and my technique is really the same, but they get modified depending on the species or foliage I'm using. And so that's kind of like a live ongoing, I guess, experimentation.
Experimentation for you. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, but that's like out of necessity. So I'm not thinking so much of like for my business or income. I need to produce this kind of tree. If I do this, I know this is will produce a reliable result. It's like I always am trying to work as reliably as possible, irrespective of the avenue. It's like I want the trees to grow healthy, things to be strong. And so that's like all the time I'm trying to like strive for that.
That makes sense. This is a little bit of a tangent, but do you think it's important to take like the optimal path to the show ready tree? Like, do you think you get a better end product if you like let's say it like the most the like the best aesthetic you can reach for a juniper, it like the like if you're 100% dialed, you could do it in 7 years,
Mhm.
but you end up doing it in 10 years instead because you weren't dialed. Do you think like that shows in the results that you get when you have that tree on the show table? Like, do you think it's important to take the most optimal path?
Yeah, I guess different ways I can answer this, but say like purely in time efficiency, I guess it's good to take the optimal path because bonsai is like an expenditure of our time. Our time value is our greatest asset. So if you don't need to needlessly waste time, I mean, it's like to your advantage. But like one thing, say I we could another way we can answer this is say like I know, say, if I graft my juniper, wire and build branches in a more compact design, so it's a more classic, quote unquote, conventional tree shape, I can build it faster. And maybe by some nature of that is that the branches are shorter, is easier to build thickness and weight to support the foliage. You don't have to grow the branches as much. Maybe a design is more simple, so there's less like inputs energy you're investing in that. So that saves time as well. But you can then say, like, well, I have a conception that, well, I want a more complex design, or I really like this kind of long, skinny drop branch kind of thing. And to bring that to fruition to the show, it might take more than 7 years because the branch is longer, is heavier, it needs more structural robustness and lignification, or you have a lot of complexity and delicate small branches, your horticultural ability to grow all of them together in perfect balance and health might take more time to obtain that optimum cycle. And so those situations, it takes longer, but that is not like more or less optimal. It's just of natural consequence. To fulfill a expression you want, it has to take more time. But
Yes, yes.
more is like you should always, within whatever you're trying to pursue, of course, like do it as quick as you can without sacrificing the quality of your desired result.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I was thinking of it in the context of not like, oh, I can build a tree by grafting in 5 years or with the natural branches in seven. I was thinking of it more like, oh, like I've chosen how I'm going to, like, what the end aesthetic I want is. And like because I was weak on my horticulture, I like styled it this time of year and it set it back a year, and then it took an extra 2 years to make versus, oh, I was locked in and I managed to execute it in exactly the time necessary for whatever those aesthetic goals were. And like maybe the answer is just like, okay, well, this tree can become unstable if you keep making these mistakes over time, and you might never realize your
Yeah,
goal, right?
right. That's a real possibility. It's kind of like, I mean, you always try to do, like, I guess in a sense, you're striving for perfection, but then
Mm,
maybe reality is different, or there's some condition imposed on you, or tree health. And I mean, and a lot of it is like a work in progress. Like for most hobbyists and practitioners, like you sometimes you have to see the avenue that didn't work, or say say like a tree that you styled, maybe it's happened a little too early, the branches wasn't healthy enough and it didn't receive certain necessary amount of cultivation. I mean, maybe you still learn something with that styling and you still accomplish a certain level of progress in that tree, or maybe in the environment you're getting the tree styled, maybe you have input or advice from a professional and you're like, well, I really would love to see how this professional like utilizes this line, and it's just like now, like the chances now, and so maybe it's non-optimal, but that's just the avenue that was available to you, and then later you have to compensate, like say if it was styled a little too early or the branches were a bit too wimpy. When you spread out branches to a high surface area, but it's like too skinny, it takes longer for those branches to regain momentum, then to start growing, and then to put on the wood to lock in the line and structure you want. And then so you end up paying the price later. Okay, it's going to take a little longer. But I think as long as people like consciously engage with that, they're trying to improve their tree, and then maybe your pathway is not most optimum or efficient, but you can still obtain a very high level and beautiful tree in the end. But that means like a caveat, you are like consciously working to that, because you could endlessly work your tree and go in circles, and 10-year passes and you're like, oh, it's like kind of the same. Like you're like,
yeah, that makes
I
sense.
had it for 10 years and it's national exhibit tree.
Yeah, it should still be getting better every time you work it. And yeah, and hopefully it makes it there. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, from my perspective, I'm not super well versed on the SoCal bonsai scene, but it seems like you've taken a very active kind of leadership role in SoCal. I've seen you doing like lots of study groups. I've seen you kind of nurturing a new group of practitioners and probably a new set of like skills and techniques. And then I've also seen like you taking on large scale events like the Naka Memorial. So yeah, I wanted to understand from you, like, why was it important for you to do that? Or like, I don't see every professional doing that same kind of setup in a region to the same extent. So I was just curious, like, what that means to you, and how you found that since you came back.
Yeah, I mean, some of that is just of natural consequence, like say for professional bonsai model, you're providing like a service and you're selling your time and engaging with people and collections. And most people are like kind of a hobbyist base. So it's not like I'm just strictly working on people's collections. It's like teaching them, engaging with them. So it's kind of normal. You end up have like study groups and work with other people. Like in SoCal is kind of interesting because they have like a deep bonsai history because say the early like post World War II practitioners and like people like John Naka, they were all kind of starting from there. So the early rounds of kind of dissemination of bonsai knowledge started from Southern California. So we have like a lot of older clubs, and I guess you can say these like, I mean, a lot have passed away now, but like legacy teachers, and it was like pretty impressive. We had, a group of these like kind of OG SoCal bonsai people, like at the Yamaguchi nursery. I can't remember the guy. Maybe it was George Yamaguchi, and like Richard Oda, and there's like Frank Goya. There's like a lot of these guys, and they all like made it over 100 years old. It was like super impressive, and it's kind of just natural consequence of life. But last 5 years, some of these people have been passing away. But I mean, like all of them, they like lived to like 100 I was like, man, like what is like the common thing in all these people?
I want to be eating whatever they were eating.
Yeah, but anyways, basically there's like a rich history and an old pre-existing club scene here. And so when I've kind of like started getting to bonsai and then chose to do it professionally, and then right, I'm like currently like based out of LA. Initially it was honestly very like difficult in figuring out how do I engage with the bonsai community here, because in some sense, say you're these early practitioners or professionals, that they had to learn bonsai through the brute force way of like grow the deciduous tree, see the first round 10 years in, you're like, oh crap, like let me do the next one bet. You will exhaust your life doing that. And so I have like a lot of respect that people, they had to vet everything the hard way. It's like we take for granted that we have like a lot of great accessible knowledge. And so they obtained a level of ability and skill through just like very hard work. And so I give a lot of credit for that. But then kind of on the same side, I understand it's like, say when this newer demographic, or I always think of like, I call like post Boone era, since Boone went to Japan, he brought also a lot of professionals to Japan, and there was like a not quite exponential, but a increase of
Yeah, like a
people coming
conga
back
line of,
pretty much
yeah.
the early 90s all the way until the start of COVID. There was always somebody coming back. And so there's just like this new era of information and accessible professionals and individuals. And so say like coming back in this kind of like later era, it's at first is hard in that like, oh, like am I stepping on toes? Or like you can be like, well, I've worked this hard or to some level, and I'm acknowledged in the community as a bonsai master. Or and I don't say that like disparagingly. It's they could have, within the scope of their knowledge and ability, still obtain a very legitimate level. But it's kind of tricky where it's like there's this some level of like generational separation. And then say when you've been like top dog or whatever for like 30 years, and some random person's like, well, I learned like blah 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 from Japan, or it's not even you have to go to Japan, right? But say you've like consciously put an effort to learn, and you did not have to learn via the brute force method, right? You can take advantage of these slices and windows of observed development, expedite your bonsai knowledge. It's kind of like not comparable. I mean, you have a huge advantage. And so you do come in with maybe more precise skill or knowledge. And so honestly, for me in the beginning, it was difficult in that, like, aside from a few clubs, not a lot of people would engage with me in Southern California. And so at first I was like really worried. I was like, oh, like, will I survive?
Yeah, I need to get
And
enough
like
jobs
and
to, yeah.
like and like I and maybe I just had hoped or expected. I was like, oh, so like my knowledge, my or perspective when I was wanting in on the ongoing process of learning bonsai, it's like any resource available, any professional, anything I can learn. I was like, oh, it's like such a great opportunity, and I'm very lucky this skilled person is able to share their knowledge with me. And it's like not easy, right? To gain all that knowledge and experience, right? It's you make certain like sacrifices in your life, right? I mean, it's like a choice, right? It's not anything I regret, but it's just what I chose to prioritize. And so I think I kind of hoped initially that's like, oh, like I am a professional just to the ability that I can offer, right? I won't like say like, oh, I am like top master or whatever, but I know I have a capable proficiency that is professional work and I offer this service to give my skill and through my business. And then I was like, oh, well, if you're learning bonsai locally, the obvious thing is like you take advantage of that, right? And it should be some kind of symbiotic relationship. But really kind of what I found is like that may or may not be the case. And also it's also wrong for me to impose on others and say like if you're not trying to pursue bonsai at the highest level, then you're just like you're not doing real bonsai. This is just like crappy trees. People can find enjoyment in all levels of bonsai, and as long as you are working conscientiously with the effort you put in and what you expect to get out, it doesn't matter if you're super beginner to professional. It's like all legitimate. So like I should never say like poo poo or disparage other people's forms of bonsai. But at the same time I was kind of I guess like in a weird spot. It's like, okay, I'm back. How do I engage with the community? There's like deep history and legacy here? Is there a mutually symbiotic way that benefits the existing community but also supports me as a professional? And that's honestly still a work in progress, right? I mean, there is a lot of real generous and great people in the community here who's supported and helped with me. And so kind of in the last few years, yeah, I've tried to engage with study groups more, but I've also observed post COVID, there's a lot, while I've been saying like these OGs as over 100 years old, they've been passing away. We've also, post pandemic, have been getting a lot of, I guess I say quote unquote younger, say like 20s to 40s of new people in SoCal entering bonsai that have, I think, a great, like potential or their perspective on how they're trying to pursue bonsai is more like aligned, kind of the post boon bonsai era. So a part of it, it's like, okay, I should positively engage with these people and I also should try to do my part to support them, and because overall it will strengthen the community which benefits me. And so I've been, I guess, trying to involve in that extent, or like in my study groups, I meet people who are like young and very serious, and try to offer like advice or support. I do think the bonsai market is like big enough to bear, more professionals. Like, I mean, LA is a large market. There totally potentially could be other professionals here. And so I never go in the mindset where it's like, oh, this is limited slices of pies. Like I need to like nip the bud while it's young. And I was like, oh, these like future competitors, I need to lead them astray. And I mean that would be wrong for me to do because I've been very generously helped by other people in the past. And so yeah, stuff with study groups and meeting these kind of like younger, very motivated individuals. The thing with the Naka show, how that came about is initially, so that show has like of course is originally it was John Naka show. Of course, he's long since passed. I think in 2005. but they maintained the legacy. And the last show chair exhibit was Ted Matson, the recently retired curator at the Huntington Collection. Initially Ted had asked me a few years ago, like, oh, would you be interested in taking over? And I was kind of like, like, I don't know. And then it was like 2 years ago, Ted was kind of like, oh, okay, so you need to know these things when you take over. And I was like, oh, what? Like, I didn't like really say yes explicitly, but I was kind of too much of like a pushover and sucker. I was like, didn't really say no either. And so it's kind of a little lukewarm. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing this. And I just got roped into it more. So it's kind of this weird thing where, yeah, this show has this great historical relevance in the SoCal bonsai scene. And it's like, I think since like the late 50s or something that they've had this show. So I'm fairly certain. So that, I mean, it's like 70 years of shows or whatever. And so also it feels like a huge waste just to like let that die. I feel guilty or bad. So I took it over, but then a big thing for me when I took it over is like, I'm not here just to maintain the status quo. I also have like my own reputation I have to uphold as a professional. And if I do this very lukewarm show with, poor quality trees, it just doesn't reflect well on me, because it's like the different if I was just doing that as a hobbyist just for fun, but then my livelihood is also judged on my ability in bonsai. So it would be a bad deal. So I kind of went into that and I was like, well, we have to make a lot of changes. We brought in like a juring system, try to promote it, and like website everything, do media stuff. And yeah, honestly, it's been like a lot of work. I mean, it's still a small show compared to, this is nothing like a convention. It's just an exhibit of trees. We don't do like demonstrator stuff like that, bringing in other artists. So it's not to the scale of what other organizations or individuals are doing, but it ended up still being quite a lot for me to take on myself. I mean, I'm having some people help me, like Ryan Pitts, he's co-chair, and I've been getting some help and support for that. And so that is really kind of a work in progress or experiment, where it's also, well, kind of the success or not of that show will kind of reveal what is my relation with the broader community in SoCal by like the demographics of who supports it in terms
Yeah,
of
it makes
both
sense.
exhibitors and attendees. I was very careful when I introduced the juring system to make it crystal clear how trees are being perceived, how they're being judged, and also regard especially the old timers with like the utmost respect. Maybe it feels bad if like this kind of newer person comes in and it's just like poo-pooing
All your
people's
trees are
tree. And I
crap.
was, I was
Yeah, we're
like,
not putting them in
clubs,
the
you
show. Yeah.
guys like suck. Like you don't know. I really the best scenario is that, I integrate and get an engagement both from the pre-existing community and kind of like hopefully give this like motivator of like, you can strive and push your trees more. Not that you have to do that, but you see an avenue of, not everything is going to
Showing
be
that off,
great,
or
but
yeah,
like
like
say the
having that
on
be
average,
acknowledged.
yeah, the on average efforts, like trees at a higher level. And this is like a excellence we're trying to pursue, and have that be like a motivator for people. And so it's yeah, like trying to get both like the pre-existing community, but also involve like all these like newer and younger guys, right? Like, I mean, Ryan's been great. He's been helping me a lot. Kyle Hansen, like the Refined Roots, he's like very early in his bonsai, but super motivated and making a strong effort. There's another guy in San Diego, Matthew Gelasio, who's just like really great sensibility and potential in bonsai. I mean, like all of these people were like better than me for like the equivalent effort put into bonsai. So they're just like very self motivated, and they have some inherent conception. Something like we can talk about. Like I listened to your Bjorn podcast, and Bjorn
Well,
said,
I wanted to say one thing about the. You guys do have an awesome crew down there in SoCal. We'll have to have some epic battles in the future of the NorCal versus SoCal with our crews. But sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and so like I listened to Bjorn's podcast, and Bjorn kind of said people have it or don't, right? There's like a talent thing. I think that's like half true. Where I can just speak for myself, but like my learning progression in bonsai was very brute forced. Like I came from like very low skill and poor conception, and I learned things the brute force method, which is just like high repetition, cramming knowledge, and just very obsessive. And that's just because I just wanted to do that, right? And it's just my conscious choice to invest my time. Maybe that's like not such a great learning method for everybody, but because I learned the brute force way and had to like consciously improve all the avenues the hard way, it also made me good at understanding how people learn bonsai, and then for me to be a good teacher for all my students and clients and see what they need. And so it's interesting. Yeah, I forgot the point I was leading with this, but like seeing all these like newer or younger people, and they have like great potential and the practice and art, and it's yeah, I should, with my experience and knowledge, not also aid and help them, because it's helping enrich the community.
Well, and
Which
hopefully they aid you in the future too, right?
yeah,
If they
yeah,
surpass you in some area, that's great because then they can help you push yourself in that avenue too, right?
yeah. So I don't really think of things like that way, or worry about that. And so in terms of the community aspect, it's like a twofold thing, where it's like, to what level can I support and engage with the pre-existing community? And all I can do is just is act genuinely and just do my best effort, and then people will choose whether they want to engage with you or not, and that's totally fine. But also, like, for like new individuals coming into the scene, help set them up for a success, give them avenues of like showing their trees or learning, which ultimately will support me. Because say like the community, as the level gets higher and people's conception of bonsai is more deep, then they will see like, okay, like, so say like for a way a professional survives, it's like a time, it's like the relation with the client is like, they recognize that for me to produce certain kind of result to achieve on my own, it takes, I'm just going to make this up, say it takes 100 hours, right? But then for the same reason you hire any professional, like they are over leveraged or specialized in this area, so you pay them for their time, but the effective time value for you is greater, because that's time you put into the job that pays for your bills, or time spent with your family. And so the professional client relation is like this symbiotic relation where you understand each other's roles well, and they support each other together, right? It's like not something you accomplish on your own. But say for like the early hobbyist perspective, or very like casual or self-taught, not necessarily they will subscribe to that, which it could be and they don't have to, right? It's just like, oh, I enjoy bonsai in the capacity in which I'm doing, and that's totally valid. It's fine. But
You're
more,
saying those people aren't a client of a professional? Is that what you're saying? Or
yeah, or say the person that would
like
not
that's not your
hire the
target market?
professional.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but say I'm not here to convince and tell people you should or shouldn't work with a professional. There's like no need. You don't have to, right? But more, you want to
Well, it
disseminate.
depends on what your goals are, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that you
Yeah.
have to engage
Yeah.
with a professional if you want to
Well,
show a tree in
yeah.
PBE or something like that,
But
right? Like,
that kind of my hope this is the long-term growth for my business and community, is that it's not like directly I tell people what they should or shouldn't do, but the knowledge is disseminated consistently enough that people understand if I want a tree to a certain capacity, this is what it requires of me. And if I can't or am unwilling to put in that time, there is also other avenues like how you can have a relation with a professional. And so even like say like for clients with big collections and a lot of work, I mean to keep all the trees progressing on track, like on a good time scale, they keep getting better and better. It's like maybe I have to visit the client at least 10 times a year. I mean, if it's like a lot of work, it could be more, like 15 plus times. But even say like a very much more casual enthusiast, or they have less trees, if they just did like 90% of the work themselves, and which truly they have to do, like they're the ones caring for the trees and have to see things through. I cannot fulfill that for them. But to say then engage with that person only one time a year or up to three times a year, just at key intervals, probably the time leverage the professional provides them in the long term, like a development of their bonsai, it like saves them way more time value of money than whatever they're paying me, right? And so I'm not trying to just like tell people work with a professional or not, but then I tend to find when people get really serious and they understand what high quality bonsai embodies, then they make conscious choices about their life situation and time allocation. So then they can make a choice whether it supports me or not, but it's, I call, good faith choices, where they understand the result and the required effort, and if they're okay with all of that, it's 100% okay. So it tends to be as the maturity of the community gets higher, actually by nature I get more work. And so like a long-term aspect, it's good, like we should give back to the community and like
That makes sense. So
invest
you're saying
in the
like that's
people.
how you think of balancing community versus like direct business that you're doing,
Yeah,
is
yeah, they're
like you need to build this base from which the clients who need a professional and thus like would then procure your services, you need to
yeah.
create that base, right? Contribute to creating that base while also
Yeah,
still,
because sometimes
growing your
our
business.
goals could be like perfectly aligned with what they want in bonsai, but because of like the information they have or the conception of bonsai, it's like they don't understand or realize that. And so as that maturity increases, it's not necessarily just business for myself, right? But then it could create a greater base that supports other professionals, new professionals. And then the community really should be, multi-layered, and they feed
Yeah.
into each other. And so you get a more dynamic bonsai scene, the quality of trees increase. And so it would be beneficial all around. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So as a very like technical practitioner, how do you think of, it's almost a challenge, like the more you build that base and the
Mhm.
higher the like pinnacle of people that need, like the people that need your full skill set, I guess I'll
Uh-huh.
say, like that group gets larger and they need more demands on your time because they have more trees and they want to get to a
Yeah.
higher level, right? And so you almost like cut yourself off from working with, that initial start of the funnel, right?
Right.
Because
You
it's
can't
like,
you can't work
yeah,
with everybody. And kind of what happens, this is my personal experience and other professionals I talk to, you will, yeah, I don't mean this in a bad way, but you'll kind of self filter your clients over time, which is just like natural. Could be like personality things, how serious they are, the just practical logistics of like, where are you traveling? How much time do you have to travel? And you will just seek the clients that you mesh best with, but has the greatest time efficiency. And there's a still, in the end, I mean, I talk about all the stuff, the community, but for me to be a professional, I have to, has to be sustainable. So like, how are the bills paid? How do I afford
yeah,
things in the
yeah, yeah.
future? I am working towards and would like to say build a garden in the future, purchase a home. These things are like very expensive. And so my business must also have like very practical considerations. And so some of that is like I guess as a whole nother topic we can discuss, like defining like professional boundaries, like doing bonsai for fun versus like my livelihood. And
Yeah. That would
I've
maybe
been
be interesting even to do like as a group, like get a few professionals on and
yeah,
see like what
yeah.
the like a little round robin, like see
Yeah, because
what
I've had this conversation with other professionals, and it's I think more or less we all feel the same, and it's interesting to hear other people's input or professionals who are just older and more experienced than me. They give me advice in terms of like engagement with people, pitfalls, and stuff with your business. I've been very fortunate, and when I quit my job in 2022, I had like 2 jobs lined up for the rest of the year on my bonsai calendar. And one was to go to Iowa, the Des Moines Bonsai Club, to do a club tour. I forgot the second one. So I had like 2 like 3-day jobs for the next 6 months. Well, my plan was like, okay, since the pandemic, I had been working full time plus taking bonsai work on the side. I just been saving most of that money. And I was like, okay, I have at least a year cushion living expense. Even if I didn't make money for whatever next year or however long, it's I can afford to test something. So I was like, that's when I was like thinking as like I can't keep flip flopping. I have to if I want to do bonsai seriously, I have to lock in. And fortunately, yeah, since that time, it's you build a lot of clients through referrals and just mainly just doing consistent work, treating people well. And so I've been since that time been able to like fill my work like relatively so there's like more work than I can take, right? I can like pretty much max my work schedule like every week.
yeah. And
And
then
so
you have to
that's
start being, like, oh, maybe I don't want to travel 8 hours
right,
away or
yeah, and it
whatever,
starts to become like,
Yeah.
well, I've passed the first stage. I can survive now. How can I afford my garden now or my home? And maybe it's not healthy to work travel and drive all the time. Do I need to put time for like family stuff or taking care of my health or a significant other kind of thing? And so it becomes hard where there's practical aspects and then this year I've gotten like more strict. I think before my boundaries was very soft and I whenever clients want to talk to me and like now I'm kind of like trying to like time max and I was and that's like a whole nother thing, trying to set good professional boundaries and have people like respect that and preserve your time. It gets like very hard. I'd say it's like full-time bonsai professional, like trying to preserve time for yourself for to live, just practical things.
Yeah, it makes
Um,
sense. Well, I always enjoy kind of hearing your really well thought out approaches. I think that's definitely like a hallmark of your bonsai practice is that you really think deeply and like have a very like analytical mindset of what you're trying to accomplish and why everything kind of logically fits together. So really appreciate you taking the time out of your your busy schedule. So anything you want to kind of leave folks with, or any topics that you really wanted to get to discuss that we didn't?
yeah, I mean, I think we talked about a lot. I mean, it's I guess nothing in particular. I mean, I would just say for people to enjoy bonsai, I mean, there's so many different levels you can practice it at, and I think you just I would say work and practice with intention. Bonsai is one of those things that rewards diligence and consistency. So work with your trees with sincerity and engage them with the love you enjoy them for and respect, and you will have greater success in the long run.
That makes sense. I mean, that's a large part of what this podcast is about is like looking very intentionally at the path to improve as a hobbyist, right? And so I'm hoping that the outcome of this is information that folks can use to not make the same mistakes that I made on my journey or any of us that we're talking to, right? And then ultimately that that they're more successful in improving at creating high quality bonsai. So I definitely love that kind of final message. Where can folks reach you, or how should they keep abreast of what's going
Um,
on with
yeah,
Julian?
I'm like active on my social media. So on Instagram, my handle is bonsai, Bontsai, and like a underscore. I have a website. It's justbonsai.com. And then Facebook, it's just my name. So you can find me on any of those and see what I'm up to, and can contact me on any of those avenues.
Awesome. Yeah, you have the perfect last name for a bonsai artist. So
Yeah.
that worked out serendipitously. I'm sure it was easy to think of your, social handles and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
well, thank you so much, Julian. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you soon. So hope you have a good night, and yeah, thanks again for taking the time.
Yep. Thank you, Addison. Appreciate it.